The wind had already begun to change when Elias Crowford heard the faint knock, soft, trembling, almost swallowed by the cold night. He unlatched the door with the caution of a man who had lived too long on the wrong side of danger. The lantern behind him cast a lonely circle of gold on the doorway, and in that halo stood a woman half-shadowed by dust and winter. Her braid was unraveling, her dress clinging with the desert's chill, and her eyes, those were the first thing he noticed, held a quiet kind of desperation that seemed older than she was. "Please don't close the door. I have no other place to go," she whispered, voice breaking like thin ice underfoot. For a heartbeat, Tom did not move. Elias felt the desert night press against his back, urging him to choose. He wasn't a man who opened his door easily, not anymore. Memories of betrayal still lived in the hollows of his ribs, gun smoke curling through his mind, a friend falling, the echo of a promise he never kept. His hand lingered on the edge of the door as though held by the ghost of his past. But something in the woman's posture, her spine held straight despite exhaustion, her bare shoulders stiff with shame, splintered his hesitation. He stepped back, said nothing, just opened the space between them. She entered like someone afraid the floor might reject her weight. The warmth of the fire washed over her face, softening the tightness around her mouth. Elias watched her stand close to the flames, but not too close, as if unsure she deserved even this small comfort. When he handed her a blanket, she accepted it with both hands, bowing her head slightly, gratitude shaping her features with delicate restraint. "Thank you," she murmured, voice thin as breath. Elias nodded once, quietly, the way men do when words feel too heavy. He could see her trying to hide her exhaustion, trying to sit with dignity even as her shoulders trembled. He didn't know her story. Didn't need to. Not yet. Pain has its own language, and she spoke it fluently. She told him her name only after a long, fragile silence. Naira. Later that morning, when the world outside had stretched into a gray dawn, Elias saddled his horse and motioned for her to follow him into town. She hesitated, but he gave her a reassuring look, steady, calm, as if promising that no one would harm her while he stood near. But the town was not made of kindness. The moment they stepped onto the dusty main street, every pair of eyes turned. Edna Mae Kittredge stopped sweeping her porch, leaning into her broom like it was a stage prop. Her voice carried farther than her good sense as she whispered loudly to a passing woman. "Crowford's taken in a stray, and a native stray at that." Mayor Huxley watched from the saloon porch, thumbs tucked in his vest, mouth pulled in disapproval sharp enough to cut. His stare was the kind that weighed and measured a person as though deciding what they were worth and finding them lacking. Naira lowered her gaze, shoulders curling inward. Each whisper, each glance, each turn back hit her like sleet. Elias felt it too. Not the shame, but the injustice of it. His steps slowed until he walked closer, shoulder brushing hers in a gesture small enough to be missed by others yet loud enough to reach Naira's heart. He bought her a pair of boots when he noticed her worn-out soles. She protested softly, but he only shook his head. "Cold ground's no friend," he said gently. Her smile, quick, shy, almost invisible, appeared and vanished like a flicker of firelight. But kindness often awakens the world's suspicions. Sheriff Boone Kessler cornered Elias outside the general store, his voice low and cold. "You're stirring trouble keeping her," he warned. Elias didn't flinch. "I ain't throwing out someone with nowhere to go." Naira overheard. Her breath caught, her hands tightening around the small parcel of supplies he'd bought. She seemed to shrink into herself, the familiar fear returning. Fear of being a burden, of causing pain just by existing. That night, while Elias stacked wood outside, she attempted to slip away. She carried only the blanket he had given her and a quiet resolve to spare him the trouble she thought she was causing. But Elias caught her at the edge of the clearing, moonlight silvering her silhouette. "You ain't trouble," he said softly. "Cold nights get cruel out there." Her breath faltered. For a moment, her strength crumbled, and tears gathered like raindrops ready to fall, but fighting for dignity. She turned away, but he stepped closer, not touching, never forcing, just offering presents. "Stay," he said simply. She nodded barely, and then the storm came. It rolled over the plains like a beast waking from sleep, lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the earth beneath their boots. They scrambled to secure the cabin, the wind cutting across their faces like shards. Naira reached out instinctively, gripping Elias's arm as another crack of lightning ignited the sky. Her touch was desperate, human, trembling. Elias covered her hand with his without thinking, a gesture as natural as breathing. Inside, the windows rattled, the roof groaned, and the world outside blurred into a swirling chaos of rain and dust. They stood side by side, watching the storm tear across the horizon, their silhouettes framed by the firelight behind them. The chaos outside mirrored the storms they'd both been carrying in silence. Two wounded souls weathering the same night. And somewhere in the quiet between thunderclaps, something unseen yet undeniable began to grow. The morning after the storm carried a different kind of silence, one softened by the scent of wet earth and wood smoke drifting lazily through the cabin. Light filtered in slowly, as if the sun itself was cautious not to disturb the fragile peace that had settled overnight. Elias poured 2 cups of coffee, and when he handed one to Naira, their fingers brushed. It lasted only an instant, but it felt like acknowledgement, like a promise that neither of them dared to name. Naira drank quietly, her eyes tracing the patterns the storm had left on the window. For the first time since Elias had found her at his door, her mouth bent into a faint, cautious smile. It startled him, not because it was rare, but because it was beautiful in a way untouched by the world's cruelty. A smile like the first thaw of spring. After a long silence, she set her cup down, turning toward him with a steadiness that seemed earned, not borrowed. "I should tell you why I was cast out," she said softly. "Not because you asked, but because you opened the door." She spoke in fragments at first, her voice wavering like a lantern flame. She told him about little Fawn, the child she'd sworn to protect. The night the elder of her tribe raised his hand to the girl for breaking a rule she didn't understand. The way Naira stepped between them, taking the punishment meant for the child. The council's anger. The accusation of disobedience. The exile that followed. "I thought I'd done right," she whispered. "But right is not always forgiven." Elias didn't interrupt. He listened with a patience carved from old wounds, from years of learning that suffering can be shared without being spoken. "You were brave," he finally said. "Braver than anyone who turned their back on you." Her eyes glistened, not with sorrow, but with relief. She had expected judgment and found something gentler, steadier. But the world around them was not so kind. Edna May's gossip spread like smoke from a brush fire, reaching every ear in town. "Crowford's hiding trouble," she hissed to anyone who'd listen. "How long before danger follows?" Mayor Huxley, prideful and hungry for order, instructed Sheriff Kessler to remove Naira from the county line by sundown. When Naira overheard this, her breath stilled and the old instinct returned, the belief that she was a burden best removed quietly. She packed her few belongings again, moving with resignation rather than fear. Elias found her by the door, shoulders drawn tight, face steady but hollow. "You're not leaving," he said. "I don't want to bring trouble to your doorstep. It ain't trouble if I choose it." His voice was low, unwavering, a river carving its path through stone. She let the bag slip from her fingers. She didn't thank him with words. She simply looked at him with a depth that communicated trust in a way language never could. That afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Elias showed her something he had never shown another soul. From a tin box hidden beneath the floorboard, he brought out a small brass button, worn smooth by years of being held. "My best friends," he explained. "I wasn't there when he needed me most." The pain in his voice was quiet, unpolished. Naira placed a beaded necklace, her last tie to her old life, into his palm. Not as a trade, but as a gesture of equal trust. A bridge built from 2 broken stories. The ground trembled slightly before they heard the horses. Sheriff Kessler and 2 deputies approached the cabin, dust rising behind them like a warning. Elias stepped outside, standing tall in the fading light. Naira joined him, refusing to stand behind him, only beside. The sheriff reined in his horse. "She's coming with us," he said, voice devoid of sympathy. "She's done no harm," Elias replied, his tone calm but firm. Mayor Huxley rode up behind them, his words sharp with conviction. "This town don't need outsiders stirring trouble." Crowford stepped aside. The tension thickened the moment, stretching long and thin like a rope about to snap. Naira stepped forward, lifting her chin. "If I leave, it will be to spare him trouble," she said. "Not because I fear you." Her dignity, the clear, unwavering force of it, silenced even the wind. Just then, a sudden gust whirled dust into the air. Another followed, sharper. Within seconds, a full dust storm rose from the plains as though the land itself had decided to intervene. Visibility vanished. Horses panicked, neighing and stomping. Deputies shielded their eyes, forced to turn away. Sheriff Kessler shouted commands no one could hear over the growing howl. Mayor Huxley retreated first, choking on grit. Elias reached for Naira, pulling her close enough that he could shield her with his body as the storm swallowed the world around them. Dust tore past them like a wild thing, the sky turning a furious red-brown. It was chaos, but it was also deliverance. When the dust finally settled, the lawmen were specks on the horizon, retreating back toward the safety of town. The plains lay quiet again. Elias and Naira stood alone, covered in earth as though the storm had claimed them and returned them reborn. Their chests rose and fell with the same rhythm, two heartbeats finding sync after a long and weary journey. "Looks like you're staying," Elias said softly. Naira met his gaze, steady, no longer fragile. "For the first time, I think I might belong somewhere." He didn't argue, didn't rush, just stood there with her in the quiet dusk, letting the moment breathe. And as the last of the storm clouds drifted away, a narrator's voice seemed to rise from the wind itself. If you have ever stood outside a door, praying it wouldn't close, if you've ever felt like the world had no place carved for you, remember this: sometimes exile is the beginning, not the end. Sometimes the road you take alone leads you to the one person who will finally see you, not as a burden, but as a soul worth welcoming.